Continuing still the discussion of Vishnu Sahasranama, name 801, Arka. Understanding Krishna to be the sun and going through various examples and analogies given by Srila Prabhupada, following the footsteps of previous acharyas, about how through the manifestations of the sun we can understand various aspects of spiritual knowledge. Now, certainly the sun is very important in this material world, but again, the sun is only one manifestation of so many within the material world, and yet simply from contemplating the sun, we can find so many analogies that we can employ for helping us to understand the absolute truth, Lord Sri Krishna. So let's go on with another few of them. This is from Srila Prabhupada's purport to Sri Isopanisad, Sri Isopanisad, verse 8, about how the sun is neutral. To confirm that the Lord is always pure and uncontaminated, Sri Isopanisad describes him as Shuddham, antiseptic, and Apapa-vidham, prophylactic. It's interesting that Srila Prabhupada uses those English words to translate. They remind us of the pharmaceutical connection that Srila Prabhupada had. There could be so many ways these words could be translated, but Srila Prabhupada explains it as he goes on in the purport, that how Krishna is antiseptic and prophylactic. He is antiseptic in the sense that even an impure thing can become purified just by touching him. The word prophylactic refers to the power of his association. As mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, a devotee may appear to be sudurachara, not well behaved in the beginning, but he should be accepted as pure because he is on the right path. This is due to the prophylactic nature of the Lord's association. The Lord, prophylactic, it's not among the most common of English words. For those who don't know, it refers to the nature of medicine or anything that acts to prevent disease before it starts. The Lord is also Apapa-vidham because sin cannot touch him. So in two ways, he is Apapa-vidham. That just by coming in contact with him, you can't sin. That doesn't mean you should come in contact with him and then attempt to sin. He's prophylactic, and then sin cannot touch him. Even if he acts in a way that appears to be sinful, such actions are all good, for there is no question of his being affected by sin. Please take note, those who would criticize Krishna for being immoral. Now, the example of the sun comes in, because in all circumstances he is Shuddham, most purified. He is often compared to the sun. Now, how is the sun always pure? The explanation of this is being given now. The sun extracts moisture from many untouchable places on the earth, yet it remains pure. For instance, urination. If you urinate on the earth, those who live in sophisticated cities cannot imagine urinating on the earth, but those who live in the countryside do it all the time. And in a hot country, like most of India is most of the year, that urine will be evaporated. The water section of it will be evaporated, and then the earth will become dry again, and the smell and the impurity of the urine no longer remains. So the sun remains pure, and it purifies that urine. And similarly with stool, you pass stool in the field, and the sun dries it up, and then it dissolves into the earth. So the sun remains pure while it purifies impure things. So Srila Prabhupada continues, in fact, it, referring to the sun, purifies obnoxious things by virtue of its sterilizing powers. If the sun, which is a material object, is so, powerful, then we can hardly begin to imagine the purifying strength of the all-powerful Lord. Yeah, the sun purifies materially, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead purifies spiritually. Another example of how the sun is neutral or impartial is given in Srila Prabhupada's purport to Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 8, Text 29. He, the Supreme Lord, is undoubtedly known as partial to his pure devotees. Yeah, Kaunteya pratijanihi name bhakta pranashyati. Krishna tells Arjuna, you go and tell everyone that my devotee is never vanquished. Kaunteya, you go and tell. Kaunteya, that means you're going to be my devotee, right? Because Queen Kunti is so dear to me, and I'm so dear to her, and you are dear to Kunti, and she is dear to you, so the relationship is established like that Arjuna is so dear to Krishna. So you go and proclaim it. By your you know Arjuna, you can personally say that Krishna always protects me. I'll never be vanquished. So he's partial to his pure devotees. But in fact, Srila Prabhupada continues in the purport, he is never partial as much as the sun is never partial to anyone. By utilizing the sun's rays, even the stones become valuable. And that's, we'll discuss in a verse from Brahma Samhita about the stone known as Surya Kanta, which becomes imbued with the potency of the sun. Even stones become valuable, whereas a blind man cannot see the sun, although there are enough sun rays before him. Darkness and light are two opposite conceptions, but this does not mean that the sun is partial in distributing its rays. The sun rays are open to everyone, but the capacities of the receptacles differ. So what's the point here? The sun shines on everyone, and another example is given, not in relation to the sun, but it's used in relation to the moon, but it can just as well be given in relation to the sun. How the moon's rays, they shine on the house of the Chandala and the king equally. The Chandala can get the same refreshment from the moon's rays as the king does. So the moon is neutral, is neutral, impartial, giving the benefit to everyone impartially. So in the same way, the sun shines on everyone, but it depends on the capacity of the individual to take advantage of that. The blind man is not able to. The person with sight takes advantage of the sun rays to see. So in the same way, someone who is blind to their own self-interest, apashyatam atmatattvam griheshu grihamedhinam, one who takes his self-interest to be his entanglement in material existence, being blind to the knowledge of self-realization, such a person, even though Krishna gives the light of spiritual knowledge, a person who is willingly blind to that, or committedly blind to that, matena krishne paratasvato va mito bipadyeta grihavratanam. There are so many verses in this regard. They're not probably not coming up in the live feed because I'm just saying them as they come to my mind. Whereas someone who is inclined to Krishna, he can take advantage. That knowledge is there for everyone. Just like here in India, the knowledge, especially here in India, the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita is there. It's available. It's open. It's not something as in the Western world, at least previously to Srila Prabhupada's going there and having his Bhagavad Gita edition published and distributed. It's not well known, and it's not part of mainstream culture, whereas in India it is. To quote Bhagavad Gita, of course in today's secular India it may not be so common, but otherwise Bhagavad Gita is well known, but not everyone takes advantage. It's there for everyone, but not everyone takes advantage. Okay, going through to the 11th canto of Bhagavatam, chapter 28, text 8. Etad vidvan maduditang jnana vijnana naipunam nanindati nachastauti loke charati suryavat. Suryavat means like the sun. And this is a different example altogether. One who has properly understood the process of becoming firmly fixed in the theoretical and realized knowledge as described herein by me. This is Krishna speaking elaborately on transcendental knowledge. Does not indulge in material criticism or praise. Like the sun, he wanders freely throughout this world. So the sun goes throughout the world. Is not involved in it. The sun is shining here and there. In the meantime, different nations are fighting, different people are fighting, and different controversies going on. So many things are going on, but the sun just keeps on moving, keeps on shining, keeps on creating clouds. So in the same way, a self-realized person doesn't get involved in the intricacies of this material world, knowing that everything here is ephemeral and it's really got nothing to do with me. At the present time, there's a war going on in Ukraine, which probably most of the people in the world never heard of, and probably the people in the village I'm staying in around here, they also never heard of Ukraine, and they don't care what's going on there. But modern telecommunications make everyone, oh, what's going on, what's going on? If you're living there, it certainly makes a difference to your life. Otherwise, why bother so much? The wars come and go, and so many wars. There have been so many wars, there will be so many wars. Chant Hare Krishna. Don't unnecessarily get involved in things that are extraneous to our quest for perfecting this rare human form of life. Now, a verse from the 2nd canto of Bhagavatam. In here the word Arka comes, although it doesn't stand as a word on its own. It becomes yatarko. You can listen out for it. Yena svarochisa vishvam rochitang rochiyameham yatarko gnir yatasamo yatarksha grahatarakaha. I, this is Lord Brahma speaking, create after the Lord's creation by his personal effulgence, known as the Brahma Jyoti, just as when the sun manifests its fire, the moon, the firmament, the influential planets, and the twinkling stars also manifest their brightness. So another example given. Lord Brahma is saying, I manifest. I am the great creator of this universe. But my creation, it's a secondary function. It's a creational function. Atra sarga visargascha. The first creation is done by the Supreme Lord, and that also in a somewhat detached way. He doesn't get directly involved, but he manifests the ingredients of the he manifests in unmanifest form the ingredients for the. He brings it out, the ingredients for the material manifestation, and Brahma takes that, and with a fragment of the Lord's power, which is invested in Brahma, he creates the whole material manifestation. And he gives the example that just like the sun manifests its brightness, and everything else that is bright to a greater or lesser extent, the moon, the firmament, the sky, the influential planets, the graha, those, Srila Prabhupada's translation of graha, it means those planets, stars that astrologically are seen to influence life on this planet and other planets. And all the stars, they also manifest their brightness. So there's an example. We may not see the sun, but we can remember the sun. Just like if you go out at night. The other night, I couldn't sleep, so I got up. It was 1:30 in the morning. So many stars, so many stars. And then again, you can remember the sun, even though the sun is not visible. That they are manifesting a portion of the sun's light. In the same way that Yadyat vibhuti mat sattvam Śrimad urjitam eva va tattadeva avagachatvam mama tejong sasambhavam. Everything in the material world is a tiny reflection of Krishna's potency. So in this way we can always go on remembering Krishna by remembering the sun. Not necessary directly to remember the sun, but so many examples are given in relation to the sun. We want to be Krishna conscious, particularly, not sun consciousness. But if we are Krishna conscious, then we'll be able to see the sun and everything else in relation to Krishna and be able to extract or understand so many important spiritual truths by seeing the sun, by seeing the stars, by seeing or feeling the wind. Everything becomes an incentive or a reminder to us of Krishna. Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 27, Text 1. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Prakritisto pi purusho najate prakritaya gunai avikarad akritritvan nirgunatvaj jalarkavat. Again the word Arka comes here, jalarkavat. Jal gives the understanding of water, Arka of the sun, and vat, just like. What is all this all about? This is the first of several verses I'll be reading about how we can gain spiritual understanding by considering the sun in relation to the reflections of the sun. So, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, the personality of Godhead, Kapila, continued. And we can see that from the very words in this verse that the subject under discussion is very similar to that discussed in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So, the personality of Godhead, Kapila, continued. When the living entity is thus unaffected by the modes of material nature, because he is unchanging and does not claim proprietorship. He remains apart from the reactions of the modes. Now, we've already had this example about how someone lives in this world like the sun. He's unaffected because he doesn't identify with the material world. And this is another example. He remains apart from the reactions of the modes, although abiding in a material body, just as the sun remains aloof from its reflection on water. The sun is there, the reflection is there. The reflection can be as bright as the sun itself, but the sun is aloof, is far, far distant, much more powerful. The reflection is only possible because of the sun, but the sun is aloof from the reflection. So in the same way, when someone understands that I am unchanging, I don't have anything to do with this material world, so I shouldn't claim proprietorship over it. I shouldn't think, this is mine. Then a person, he remains aloof from everything going on in this world because he knows I am aloof. By nature I'm aloof. I have nothing to do with it. And it may appear that I am involved, and I may, for all practical purposes, have to get involved, but actually I have nothing to do with it. Just like the sun, although the reflection of the sun, jalar kavat, on water. Here it's been given the example, the reflection of the sun on water. The sun is very much involved with the reflection. The reflection cannot exist without the sun. But at the same time, the sun really has nothing to do with it. So in the same way, the material body cannot function. We cannot move in this material world without the soul being there, without the soul giving life to the body. But at the same time, the soul really has nothing to do with all of this. And if we understand that, then although living in this world, acting in this world, we remain aloof from it. And that way, we remain liberated. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, again in the instructions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami, he mentions one of these points, how the external energy comes from Krishna, but he's different from it, and then Joiche Surya Sthane Bhashaye Abhash Surja Bina Shatamtrata Nahoy Prakash. Sometimes a reflection of the sun is experienced in place of the sun. You don't directly see the sun, but you see a reflection of the sun. But the illumination of the reflection is never possible independent of the sun. So in the same way, the material energy is seen, Krishna is not seen, but we should know that everything going on in the material world is only possible because of Krishna. Now, from Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 28, Text 63, being affected by the conditioning of matter, Mayavadi philosophers cannot see the difference between the Supreme Lord and the living entity. When the sun is reflected in a pot of water, the sun knows that there is no difference between himself and the reflected sun in the water. Those in ignorance, however, perceive that there are many small suns reflected in each and every pot. As far as the brilliance is concerned, there is brilliance both in the original sun and in the reflections, but the reflections are small, whereas the original sun is very large. So, the sun, again, reflection in water. There is no difference between the sun and the reflected sun in the water. There's difference and non-difference. There's no difference in as much as the sun as seen in the water is only the same sun that's shining in the water. But in ignorance, we think that in every pot there are many small suns. We don't recognize their connection with the original sun. We think they're independent. They think, the Mayavadis, they think that every jiva is part of Brahma, but they don't recognize, it's difficult to exactly say, they don't say it's part of Brahma because they don't recognize any part, but they don't recognize that there's a supreme source of everything who remains aloof and is always supreme, and that we are dependent on that supreme. They think the jiva is just reflected in a part, and then it's just like the sun reflected in a pot. And if you think there are many small suns, but there's no original sun, then you're like the Mayavadis who don't recognize that there is the Supreme Lord, and we're all dependent on the Supreme Lord for our very existence. The reflections are small and the original sun is very large, but the Mayavadis think that we, the jiva, are one with God and our God. Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 15, Text 58. Abhadito pi hiabhaso yata vastutaya smitaha durghatatvad aindriyakang tadvad artha vikalpitam. Although one may consider the reflection of the sun from a mirror to be false, it has its factual existence. Accordingly, to prove by speculative, or attempt to prove by speculative knowledge that there is no reality would be extremely difficult. This is another shot at the impersonalist. Srila Prabhupada gives the purport. Anyway, the point is there. You say the reflection of the sun in the mirror is false because it's not actually a sun. There's no sun there, so it's false. But the reflection exists. You can't say it's absolutely false. If we think that the reflection of the sun in the mirror is absolutely equal to the sun, that is a false understanding. But if we understand that there is a sun by which the reflection is made possible, then where's the falsity? To say there's no reality, there's no reality, this material existence, there's no reality because it's just like a reflection of the Supreme. This is the false understanding that certain types of impersonalists who are called Vivartavadis. Vivarta means transformation. They say that Brahma cannot be transformed, and therefore whatever we see in this material world, we see it as a transformation, but it cannot be, so it doesn't exist. That's simply put, Vivartavad. Okay, from Srila Prabhupada's purport. The impersonalists try to prove that the varieties in the vision of the empiric philosopher are false. The impersonalist philosophy, Vivartavad, generally cites the acceptance of a rope to be a snake as an example of this fact. Yeah, there's a common example, or the example of the silver seen in an oyster shell. The rope as a snake. You mistake a rope. At twilight, you see a rope and you think it's a snake, and you become afraid. But then you say, oh, it's false. There's no snake. So our perception of a snake is wrong, but there is a rope. Something is there. So we can't say nothing's there. These are the kind of things that in the highly developed philosophical, theological culture of India have been argued for centuries. So, the impersonalist philosophy, Vivartavad, generally cites the acceptance of a rope to be a snake as an example of this fact, or what they consider to be a fact. According to this example, the varieties within our vision are false, just as a rope seen to be a snake is false. The Vaishnavas say, however, that although the idea that the rope is a snake is false, the snake is not false. Well, seeing a rope as a snake, the snake that what we thought was a snake it's a false perception. But there are such things as snakes. So the snake, or the conception of a snake, is not false. One has experience of a snake in reality, and therefore he knows that although the representation of the rope as a snake is false or illusory, there is a snake in reality. Similarly, this world, which is full of varieties, is not false. It is a reflection of the reality in the Vaikuntha world, the spiritual world, so that we see a reflection of the sun. Or you may say, well, reflection is false. Well, yeah, it's not the real sun, but it's a reflection of the real sun. In the same way, this material world, the impersonalists say it's false. No, it's not false, but it's a reflection of the real world, the Vaikuntha world. Continuing reading from this purport, the reflection of the sun from a mirror is nothing but light within darkness. Thus, although it is not exactly sunlight, without the sunlight the reflection would be impossible. Similarly, the varieties of this world would be impossible unless there were a real prototype in the spiritual world. The Mayavadi philosopher cannot understand this, but a real philosopher must be convinced that light is not possible at all without a background of sunlight. Thus, the jugglery of words used by the Mayavadi philosopher to prove that this material world is false may amaze inexperienced children, but a man with full knowledge knows perfectly well that there cannot be any existence without Krishna. So this is a very important understanding that we can take from the sun and the reflection of the sun. Let's go on. 10th canto, chapter 1, text 43. Jyotir yataivo daka partiveshvadaha samira veganugatang vibhavyate evang svamaya rachiteshva sau puman guneshu raganugato vimohyati. This is very interesting because it's giving a similar example and an opposite analogy to be taken out of it, or almost opposite. When the luminaries in the sky, such as the moon, the sun, and the stars, are reflected in liquids like oil or water, they appear to be of different shapes, sometimes round, sometimes long, and so on, because of the movements of the wind. You see, if there's a lake, and the lake is completely calm, and the sun or the moon is reflected in that, then you may see a completely round moon. But if there's a strong wind which ruffles the water on the surface of the lake and makes small waves, then we'll see the moon, or the sun, we're supposed to be talking about the sun, it won't seem round, it will seem elongated, and it will move as the waves move. Similarly, when the living entity, the soul, is absorbed in materialistic thoughts, he accepts various manifestations as his own identity because of ignorance. In other words, one is bewildered by mental concoctions because of agitation from the material modes of nature. So our original position is to be a facsimile, small, round reflection of Krishna. Round in the sense that the reflection of the sun is round, because the sun is round. But when we come in contact with the material modes of nature, everything gets upset, and we appear in different shapes and forms due to agitation from the material modes of nature. It's amazing that the Vedic knowledge is just vast, vast. How so many examples have been given just from the sun. Now, more about reflection. This is from, again, 11th canto, chapter 7, text 51. Bhujyate svena bhedena vyaktista eva tadgataha. Lakshate sthula matibir atma chavastitor kavat. Again, yator stitor kavat. Kavat means arkavat, like the sun. Excuse me, I just have to blink my eyes a bit. Translation of this: even when reflected in various objects, the sun is never divided, nor does it merge into its reflections. Only those with dull brains would consider the sun in this way. Similarly, although the soul is reflected through different material bodies, the soul remains undivided and non-material. So the sun is reflected in various objects. The sun is reflected in the lake, in different pots of water, maybe in different windows. Sometimes you can see, standing in one place, more than one reflection of the sun. But it's only one sun, although it appears to be divided into reflections. But factually, its existence is aloof from the reflection. It exists independently of the reflection. Similarly, although the soul is reflected in different bodies, you see there's a body of a human, there's a body of different humans, animals, insects, but the nature of the soul doesn't change according to the nature of the body. Because each and every soul is part and parcel of Krishna, the original soul. We don't actually have anything to do with these material bodies. Then, Bhagavatam, Canto 12, Chapter 4, Text 30. I have to blink my eyes a bit again. I think I'll just wipe them. Nahi satyasya nanatvam avidvan yadi manyate nanatvam chidraya yadvaj jyoti sha vataya iva. There is no duality in the absolute truth. The duality perceived by an ignorant person is like the sky contained in an empty pot and the sky outside the pot. Ghatakash, patakash, technical terms. Or the difference between the reflection of the sun in water and the sun itself in the sky, or the difference between the vital air within one living body and that within another body. So it's the same point being made in a different way, and with three examples, one of them the reflection of the sun in water and the sun itself in the sky. There's no material duality in the absolute truth. The absolute truth is manifest in various manifestations, material manifestations, but the absolute truth remains one beyond all material differences. From the Chaitanya Charitamrita, explaining similar points, this time in relation to Paramatma. Ananta shvartike joiche ek surja bhashe, toiche jibe govinde angsha prakashe. The one sun appears reflected in countless jewels. Jewels has been used, the word is shvartik, crystals. So Govinda manifests himself as Paramatma in the hearts of all living beings. Yeah, so there's one Krishna, but he manifests himself as Paramatma in countless living beings, just as the sun is one, but he's reflected in countless jewels. Then, again from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Shanyashi chit konjeev kiran konnasham Shadai Sharja Purna Krishna Hoy Surjapam. This is in refutation of the idea that a sannyasi becomes God just by accepting sannyas. Dandagrahena matrena naro narayana bhavit. The idea that simply by accepting the rod of a sannyasi, mine has fallen down here, that a man becomes God. So in reply to this, a sannyasi in the renounced order is certainly part and parcel of the complete whole. Yes, accepted. A sannyasi or any living being is part and parcel of the complete whole, just as a shining molecular particle of the sunshine is part and parcel of the sun itself. But that doesn't mean that the chitkon angsha, the tiny manifestation of sunlight, is the same as the full sun. So Krishna is like the sun full of six opulences, but the living entity is only a fragment of the complete whole. From Chaitanya Charitamrita, quoting from Brahma Samhita, and I was saying about that Suryakanta stone. Well, here we go. Bhasvan yatashva sakaleshu nijesha teja sviyanki yat prakatayat tat. Whoops, I'll say it again. Getting tongue-tied here. Bhasvan yatashva sakaleshu nijeshu teja sviyanki yat prakatayat. Whoa! Hare Krishna. Try again. Bhasvan yatasma sakaleshu nijeshu teja sviyanki yat prakatayat yapi tadvadatra brahmaya esha jagadanda vidhana karta govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. This is the translation that Srila Prabhupada gives in his rendering at Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 20, text 304. The sun manifests his brilliance in a gem, although it is a stone. Similarly, the original personality of Godhead, Govinda, manifests his special power in a pious living entity. Thus, the living entity becomes Brahma and manages the affairs of the universe. Let me worship Govinda, the original personality of Godhead. This makes clear the translation which appears in the edition of Brahma Samhita published by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, which goes as follows. I adore the primeval Lord Govinda, from whom the separated subjective portion Brahma receives his power for the regulation of the mundane world, just as the sun manifests a portion of his own light in all the effulgent gems that bear such names as Suryakanta. What's the analogy? Certain gems, they're bright, they're self-effulgent. That means they take energy, they're able to be self-effulgent. You put them in a dark room and they glow. They take energy for doing so from the self-effulgent sun, which is self-effulgent but practically unlimited more so than a gemstone. So in the same way, Brahma, the creator of this material universe, sub-creator, he's able to do so due to the power manifested in him by the actual creator, the original creator, who's much, much, much more powerful than Brahma, who is Govinda, the original personality of Godhead. Now, another example, and I'm going to be reading from the Nectar of Devotion about reflections. And this again brings into discussion the impersonalist, but it's in a very different way. All right, I'll read from the Nectar of Devotion. Sometimes impersonalists, who are not actually developed in devotional service, may also exhibit symptoms of ecstatic love, but this is not accepted as actual ecstasy. It is a reflection only. For example, sometimes in Varanasi, a holy city for impersonalist scholars, there may be seen a sannyasi crying from hearing the glories of the Lord. Impersonalists also sometimes chant the Hare Krishna mantra and dance, but their aim is not to serve the Lord, it is to become one with the Lord and merge into His existence. Rupa Goswami therefore says that even if the reactions to chanting are manifested in the impersonalist's body, they should not be considered to be symptoms of actual attachment, but reflections only, just like the sun reflected in a dark room through some polished glass. The chanting of Hare Krishna, however, is so nice and transcendental that it will eventually melt even the hearts of persons who are impersonalists. Rupa Goswami says that the impersonalist symptoms are simply reflections of ecstatic love, not the real thing. So what's the example going on here? Sometimes people who are not really devotees, they chant and dance, and it appears that they're in great ecstasy. And it may be some heightened emotional state, but it's not the full thing and the real thing. It's bright, just like the reflection can appear to us as bright as the sun. You can get blind. You have to close. You can't look at the reflection. It's too bright, but it's not the real thing. It's not the full thing, and we shouldn't mistake it as such. All right, there's still going to take another session to go through. At least one more session to go through all the examples of Krishna as Arka, just like the sun. I pray to Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that this discussion may be pleasing to Him and to all the Vaishnavas who are kind enough to lend oral reception to this discussion. Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha dante nitaya churnakang padaya nipatya Kritvacha kaku shatameta daham bravimi hey sadhava sakala eva vihaya durat gauranga chandra charane kurutanaraga parivadatu jano yata tata va nanumokaro navayang vicharayamaha hari rasa madira madati mata bhuvi vilotama nartama nirvishama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,